I had to see you. After 8 years, Emeka, why now?
You didn't know this
I
was
didn't know
my
you were
farm.
carrying a child. Is it mine? Yes, but you left. I want to be here now. You don't get to want anything here. Please, let me help. Help? You
Please.
walked away from me. I came back. 8 years.
When is the
You
baby
cannot just
due?
land out of the sky and come back. A billionaire returns to his pregnant ex-wife after 8 years. And what he found on the red hills of Jos tore open a lie so old it had a heartbeat of its own. Stay with me. Because nothing about the day
It was
that
you this
helicopter
whole
came
time.
down in that cocoa field went the way anybody planned.
I didn't want to believe
The
them.
arrival of the helicopter should never have touched down on that hill. Emeka Adeylo had told the pilot to set down at the small airstrip outside Jos, where a driver would be waiting with a cooled car to carry him up to the Okereke estate for a quiet professional survey of some land his people had been circling for months. Instead, the Harmattan haze had rolled in thick and red off the plateau, a dust so fine it turned the afternoon the color of old blood, and the pilot, a nervous young man named Seifu, who flew for the charter outfit Emeka's company used, had banked twice over the escarpment before jabbing his finger at a flat green shelf of cultivated land and shouting over the rotor that it was the only safe place to come down. So Emeka stepped out into a field of wet cocoa saplings in handmade Italian shoes, holding a leather folder worth more than the pickup truck rusting beside the barn, and he understood, somewhere low in his stomach, that this day had already slipped its leash. He was 40 years old, and he owned things. That was how he thought of himself when he was being honest with himself, which was almost never. He owned glass towers in Lagos and a fintech platform that moved money across 9 African borders before breakfast, and a logistics arm that ran freight from Accra to Nairobi, and a name that opened doors before his knuckles ever touched the wood. What he did not own, what he had spent 8 years pretending not to want, was the woman who came around the side of the farmhouse, wiping her hands on a faded wrapper, and stopped dead the instant she saw his face. A daze. He had not said her name aloud in years. He had trained his mouth to leave it alone, but it rose in his throat now like a living thing with its own pulse, and he had to press his lips together to keep it from spilling into the dust. She was older, of course. So was he, but it was not the years that stopped his breath. It was the rest of her, the green dress gone soft and pale from too much washing, the dust on her forearms, and beneath the wrapper knotted at her waist, impossible to miss even from 40 feet away, the deep round swell of a pregnancy so far along that she kept one hand pressed to the small of her back, the way a woman does in the last stretch of it. She was pregnant. Heavily, undeniably, gloriously pregnant, and Emeka Adeylo's mind, which moved like a blade through numbers and contracts in the soft, undefended places in other men's positions, went completely, perfectly blank. You, she said. Just that. Not a question, not a greeting. The single word landed flat between them in the dusty air. Adiz. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. The haze, we had to come down. I didn't know this was. You didn't know this was my farm. Her eyes moved past him to the helicopter, squatting in her field like some huge iron insect, its blade slowing. That's funny, because Harmat Holdings has been sending me letters about this land for 4 months, and Harmat Holdings is yours. It was not, technically. It was a subsidiary 3 layers down, the kind of quiet arrangement his lawyers built precisely so his name never appeared on the paper that mattered. But she had always been able to do that, to slice straight through the structures he hid behind and lay one finger on the truth underneath. It's a holding I have an interest in, he said carefully. She laughed. It was not a kind sound. An interest, right, and she turned and walked back toward the long staked rows of tomatoes and peppers that ran green toward a weathered barn, and lowered herself slowly, one hand cupped beneath her belly, and went back to plucking ripe fruit into a woven basket, as though he were not standing there at all. Emeka stood frozen a long moment. Then he did the math. He could not help it. It was reflex, the same reflex that had made him rich. 8 years since the divorce, he had seen her exactly once in all that time. 4 months ago, at a charity gala in Lagos he had attended, only because a board member had all but dragged him, and she had been there on the arm of somebody else, and they had ended up in the corner of a hotel bar at 2 in the morning, saying things they had both sworn for years they would never say again. And then a night neither of them had spoken of since. A night he had made himself believe meant nothing, because the only other possibility, that it had meant everything, was more than he could carry. 4 months ago, he looked at the size of her belly again, and the blank space behind his eyes filled with a roaring he had no name for, Adeylo. He crossed the field, ruining his shoes in the red mud, until he stood at the edge of her row. "How far along are you?" She did not look up. "That is none of your business, Emeka. How far along? Go home." Her hands kept moving, plucking, sorting. "Go back to Lagos and your towers and your holdings and leave me be. I have sold you nothing. I am selling you nothing. This land was my grandmother's, and it will be my child's. And there is no figure you can write on a check that changes a single stone of it." "My child's," he repeated. "Not ours. Of course not ours." She had no reason in the world to give him that word, but the timeline sat in his chest like a swallowed stone, and he could not let it lie there. "I need you to tell me when this baby is due," he said very quietly. "Please, I'm not asking about the land. I swear to you, on my life, I am not asking about the land." Something in his voice, maybe the please, a word she had rarely heard from him in all the years of their marriage, made her go still. She stayed crouched among the plants, her back to him, her shoulders rising and falling. "Why?" she said at last, not a question, a warning. "Because if you are as far along as you look, then that night 4 months ago in Lagos wasn't. Don't." She rose faster than a woman that heavy should be able to, and turned to face him with a fury that pushed him back a step. Her dark eyes were bright with something that was not quite anger. "Don't you dare stand in my grandmother's field and do arithmetic at me. You lost the right to count anything of mine 8 years ago. Is it mine?" The words were out before he could stop them, blunt and clumsy and shaking. For a long moment she said nothing. The dry wind moved through the pepper stakes. Somewhere behind the barn, a goat bleated and stamped. High over the green terraces, a kite turned slow circles against a sky gone pale gold with dust, and the whole wide valley seemed to hold its breath along with him. "You should go," Adeylo said. Her voice had changed, quieter, more careful, and that frightened him worse than the fury had. "The haze is lifting. Your pilot can take you off this hill in 20 minutes, and you can forget you ever came down." "Adeylo, I mean it, Emeka." She pressed both hands to the underside of her belly, and for just an instant the mass cracked, and he saw beneath it something exhausted and afraid. "I have spent 8 years building a life that does not have you in it. I have a farm that is barely breathing, and a baby coming, and people who depend on me, and I cannot let you walk back in and blow it all apart again. Not again. I will not survive it again. Not again. Not the divorce again. Not the evening his mother had sat across from her in that Lagos penthouse, with a folder of papers and a voice like a slowly closing door. He did not know that part yet. He did not know about the folder, or the thing inside it, or the burden Adeylo had carried alone through the worst season of her life 8 years ago, while he sat in his offices 1,000 miles away from the truth. He did not know a single piece of it, but he was about to begin finding out. "Just answer me one question," he said. "One. And then, if you tell me to leave, I will leave. I will never set foot on this hill again. Harmat will withdraw every offer. You will never hear my name. I promise you." She studied him with the weariness of a woman who had learned the hard way exactly what his promises were worth. "One question," she said. "When is the baby due?" Adeylo Okereke looked at him across the rows of her grandmother's tomatoes in the clean gold light, with the kite turning overhead and the mud drying on his ruined shoes, and he watched her decide something, watched some last wall inside her give way to a tiredness far too old to keep on fighting. "December," she said. "The baby is due in December." December. He counted again, helplessly, the way a man counts the seconds after lightning, waiting for the thunder he already knows is coming. 4 months ago had been the end of the dry season. The numbers dropped into place, and the ground seemed to tilt beneath him, and Emeka Adeylo, who owned towers and freight, and a name that opened doors, reached out and gripped a pepper stake to keep from going down into the dirt. "Adeylo," he whispered, "why didn't you tell me?" And from the direction of the barn, a man's voice called out, sharp and territorial. "Ada! Everything all right out there?" A tall figure stepped from the barn's shadow, broad through the shoulders, skin darkened by sun, a machete hanging easy in one hand, and there was a look on his face that said he knew exactly who Emeka was, and exactly how unwelcome. Adeylo's eyes flicked toward the man, then back to Emeka, and something crossed her face that he could not read. "Go inside, Bello," she called. "I'll be there just now." But Bello did not move, and neither did Emeka, and the December baby turned, just then, beneath its mother's hands, as if it too had decided that nothing about this day would go the way anyone had planned. The 8-year wound, 8 years earlier, the city of Lagos had been drowning under the long gray curtains of the rainy season. The lagoon swollen brown and the expressways gone to rivers, and Adeylo Okereke had stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of a penthouse she had never once felt she belonged in, watching the water rise in the streets below, and waiting for a husband who did not come home. She had been 26 then, newly married, 18 months into a life that had scooped her up out of a community garden in Surulere, where Emeka had first laid eyes on her, of all places, photographing vegetables for a cooperative's little brochure, and set her down inside a world of galas and prenuptial clauses, and a mother-in-law who smiled the way a knife smiles. Emeka Adeylo. Even now, 8 years and hundreds of kilometers away, the name moved something cold through Adeylo. She stood in her farmhouse kitchen on the plateau, the morning after Emeka's helicopter had ripped open her quiet life, and she gripped the edge of the sink, and she let herself remember the thing she had spent so long refusing to touch. Because Emeka was out there right now, sleeping in the cab of a rented pickup he had ordered driven up from the city. He had refused to leave. Of course he had refused. The man had never once in his life accepted a no he did not want to hear, and sooner or later he was going to start asking the right questions, and when he did, the answers were going to gut him. She knew it. She had known it from the second she said December, and watched him grab that stake like a drowning man grabs a rope. The truth was this. 8 years ago, in that flooded Lagos rainy season, Adeylo had been pregnant. The first time. A pregnancy neither of them had planned, and both of them, to their own quiet astonishment, had wanted with a fierceness that frightened them both. She had been 10 weeks along the night. She stood at that window waiting for Emeka to come home, so she could tell him the doctor had found a heartbeat. He never came home. What came instead the next morning was Halima. Adeylo could still see it with terrible clarity. The older woman letting herself into the penthouse with a key she should never have had. Setting a leather folder on the marble island, sliding it across with one manicured finger. "Sit, my dear. We must talk about your future and Emeka's." Inside the folder had been 2 things. The first was a financial settlement, generous, obscene, the kind of money that buys a woman's silence and a clean exit all at once. "Emeka is not built for the life you imagine," Halima had said in that voice like cool water sliding over river stones. "He has told me so himself. He is overwhelmed. He does not know how to say it to your face, so he has asked me to handle it for him." The second was not a letter on paper. This was the part that made it modern and unbearable and impossible to argue with. It was a voice note. Halima had set her gold phone on the marble and pressed play, and Emeka's voice had filled that cold, bright kitchen, his exact voice, the low rasp of it, the particular way he leaned on certain words. "Dada, I can't do this. I'm not ready to be a father, and I don't think I ever will be. We both know this was a mistake. Please don't make it harder than it has to be. Take what my mother is offering and let me go." His voice, his cadence, the little catch he always made before her name. She had stood at that marble island with the rain hammering the glass, and every word of it had cut her to the bone. She had not known then, would not know for 8 more years, that Emeka Adeylo had paid a man in a studio in Ikeja 400,000 naira to build that voice note out of 100 hours of Emeka's interviews and voice messages, splicing and shaping his own words into a knife aimed at his wife. Emeka had said no such a thing, had felt no such thing, had in fact spent that entire night trapped in a boardroom in Johannesburg. 14 hours of hard negotiation away, his phone dead in a conference room, utterly unaware that his marriage was being taken apart on a kitchen island back home. All Adeylo had known was his voice, and the heartbeat in her belly, and the cold, complete certainty that the man she loved had decided, the moment things turned real, that she and the child were a mistake he wanted erased. She had signed nothing. she had not taken 1 naira of Halima's money. Whatever else the world would say about her later, no one would ever be able to say she had been bought. She had simply packed 1 bag, left her wedding ring on the marble beside the folder, and walked out into the rain. And 3 weeks later, alone in a cheap roadside lodge on the long road up to her grandmother's farm on the plateau, she had lost the baby. She told no one. Not her grandmother, who was dying that very season, and did not need the weight of it. Not the few friends who had survived the marriage. And certainly not Emeka, who, by the time he flew back from Johannesburg and found her gone, had, according to the lawyers, according to Halima, according to the vast and total silence, apparently accepted her leaving as a relief. He had not fought it. That was the part that had finished her. He had not called, not come, not done a single one of the 1,000 things a man does when his wife vanishes off the face of the earth. The divorce had gone through by post, clean and efficient, exactly as the voice note had promised. She had not understood then that a man cannot fight a war he does not know is being waged. She had built 8 years of armor on a foundation that was. She was only now, standing at this sink, beginning to suspect, entirely, catastrophically false. Because last night, before he retreated to the truck, Emeka had said something that would not leave her alone. He had said, "I looked for you, for 2 years. I had people looking, you vanished like smoke. I thought you must have hated me so much you would rather disappear off the earth than tell me why." And the way he had said it, the rawness of it, the old grief still alive in it after 8 whole years, did not sound like a man who had ever recorded the words, "I'm not ready to be a father." It sounded like a man who had never spoken them at all. Adeylo turned from the sink. Through the kitchen window she could see the truck in the gravel yard, and Emeka's dark shape inside it, awake now, watching the farmhouse with the patience of a man who had decided to lay siege to his own past. She pressed a hand to her belly, where the December baby, this baby, the one she had sworn would never know its father, the one made in a Lagos hotel room in a single hour of weakness, she had promised herself meant nothing, shifted and settled. "All right," she said quietly, to the baby, to the empty kitchen, to the ghost of a younger woman who had stood at a different window 8 years ago believing a lie. "All right, we will find out the truth, all of it." She did not know yet how close that truth was standing. She did not know that in a gated estate in Abuja, Halima Adeylo kept an old encrypted drive in a wall safe behind an oil painting. Kept it not out of sentiment, but out of the careful instinct of a woman who never once destroyed the evidence she might one day need as leverage. And she did not know that the tall, quiet farm hand watching all of this from the barn, Bello, who had turned up 14 months ago with clean references and a soft manner and a willingness to work for less than the job was worth, had taken a phone call at dawn behind the equipment shed where he thought no one could hear, and had said into it, low and urgent, "He's here, Adeylo himself. No, I don't think he knows about the mineral survey yet. This looks personal, real personal. Yes. I'll keep you posted, just make sure my cut doesn't move." Adeylo poured 2 cups of tea. Then, squaring her shoulders the way her grandmother had taught her to square them against any storm, she carried them out across the cold gravel to the truck, where her ex-husband waited to begin the conversation that would unravel 8 years of careful, painful, beautifully built lies. She tapped on the window. Emeka rolled it down, and the morning light caught his face, and she saw that he had been weeping. "We need to talk," she said. "And you are not going to like where it starts." The cold reunion, the tea had gone lukewarm by the time Adeylo finished. They had moved to the farmhouse veranda. Neutral ground, she had decided. Somewhere she could stand and he could sit, and there could be a railing between them, like a small wooden border drawn on a map. The morning sun had burned the haze off the hills, and the terraced valley lay open and green below them, and Emeka Adeylo sat in her grandmother's old cane chair, holding a chipped enamel cup he had not drunk from, listening to a story that was taking him apart 1 sentence at a time. She told him about the folder, the settlement, the voice note, when she got to the voice note, to the words, "I'm not ready to be a father," to his own voice saying them, to the little catch before her name that she had known. In her bones was his. Emeka set the cup down on the veranda boards, very slowly, as though any sudden movement might shatter something, and said, in a voice she had never once heard from him in all the years she had known him, "I never said that. It was your voice, Emeka. I know your voice. I was in Johannesburg." He looked up at her, and his eyes were wrecked. "The Thornhill merger. 4 nights. My phone died in a conference room, and the hotel's system was down for 2 of them. There was a storm, half the district lost power. I flew home and you were gone. The penthouse was empty. Your ring was on the counter." His hands had begun to shake. "There was no voice note, Ada. There was no folder. I never heard any of it. I came home to an empty flat and a wedding ring and 8 years of trying to understand what I had done to make you run." The world tilted under her, the same way it had tilted under him in the tomato field. "That is not possible," she whispered. But even as she said it, she heard the truth in him, heard it in the specific dates, the storm, the dead phone. Details no liar bothers to invent. "My mother had a key," Emeka said. The words came out flat, deadened. A man reading his own indictment. "She always had a key. I never changed the locks, because God, because I trusted her, because she was my mother." He stood too fast and gripped the veranda rail. "She told me you left because you couldn't handle the life, that you'd said as much yourself. That you'd taken a settlement and did not wish to be found. I believed her. Ada, for 8 years. I believed my own mother over." He could not finish. Adeylo sat down hard on the veranda step. Somewhere down in the lower field a goat cried. The enormity of it pressed down on her. 8 years built on a forgery of sound. A marriage murdered by a woman in an Abuja drawing room. 2 people who had loved each other, torn apart by a lie each of them had been handed from opposite ends. "There was a baby," she heard herself say. 8 years ago. I was 10 weeks along. I was waiting up that night to tell you the doctor had found a heartbeat." Emeka went absolutely still. "I lost it," she said. 3 weeks after I left, in a roadside lodge on the Joes Road, alone." She was not crying. She had done all of her crying for that season years ago. "So when you ask me why I did not tell you about this one," she pressed a hand to her belly, "that is why. Because the last time I trusted you with a child of mine, I ended up grieving it by myself in a room that smelled of diesel and disinfectant, and I swore on my grandmother's grave that I would never put a child of mine within reach of your family again." For a long moment, Emeka did not move. Then he crossed the veranda and lowered himself onto the step beside her. Not touching her, careful, a full foot of space between them, and put his face in his hands, and the broad shoulders of the man who owned towers and freight began to shake. "I'm sorry," he said into his palms. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I will never be able to fix that I wasn't there." "No," she agreed quietly. "You won't." They sat like that a long time. 2 people on a veranda step with 8 years and 1 lie and 2 babies. 1 lost, 1 coming. Between them. It was Bello who broke it. He came up from the lower barn with a coil of fencing wire over one shoulder, and he stopped at the bottom of the veranda steps, and his eyes moved between the 2 of them. Adeylo's red-rimmed eyes, Emeka's wet face, with an expression that tried to be concern and landed somewhere nearer calculation. "Ada, the vet is coming at noon for the cow, and the back fence is down again, where the storm took the tree." A pause. "You want me to handle it, or you have company all day?" There was an edge under the politeness, a staking out of territory, and Emeka, even gutted, even drowning, caught it. He lifted his head and looked at the farmhand properly for the first time, and something in him sharpened. "I'll handle the fence," Adeylo said, starting to rise. "You will not," both men said at once. They looked at each other. The air between them changed. "She is 8 months pregnant," Emeka said. "She is not stringing fence wire." "With respect," Bello said in a tone that held none. "You flew in yesterday. I have been running this place 14 months. I know what she can and can't do." "Both of you stop it," Adeylo snapped, and the sharpness of it cut clean through whatever was building between them. She stood slowly, one hand on the rail, and faced them both down like a woman who had spent 8 years being the only adult in every room she entered. "Bello, do the fence, Emeka." She hesitated, and he saw the cost of what she said next written across her whole face. "Stay. For now. We are not finished talking, but hear me. You are a guest on my land, by my permission. The second that stops being true, you are gone. Helicopter or no helicopter. Are we clear?" "We are clear," Emeka said. Bello held his gaze a beat too long, then shouldered the wire and walked off toward the back fence, and Emeka watched him go with the particular attention of a man who had built a fortune reading other men. "How long has he worked for you?" he asked. 14 months. "Why? Where did he come from?" "References. Good ones. He is a hard worker, Emeka, and he has never once." "Did you check the references yourself, or did he hand them to you?" Adeylo opened her mouth, then closed it, because the honest answer was that Bello had arrived in a lean, hungry season with a thick envelope of letters and a willingness to work cheap, and she had been drowning in farm debt and grief, and the early exhaustion of a pregnancy she had not planned, and she had not, in fact, picked up a phone to verify a single one of them. "You think like a businessman," she said instead. "I think like a man who got destroyed once for not asking the right questions," Emeka answered. "I am not making that mistake twice." The fall the afternoon wore on. Adeylo went inside to lie down. The doctor in Jos had been firm about rest. Her blood pressure was running higher than anyone liked, and Emeka, restless, walked the perimeter of the farm, pretending to admire the view, while actually cataloging every single thing: the failing fence, the barn roof that wanted work, the second mortgage notices he could see stacked on the kitchen counter through the window, the precise, deliberate way Bello's truck was always parked nose out, ready to leave fast. He was behind the equipment shed, quietly on the phone to his assistant in Lagos, asking her to run a discreet background check on a man named Bello, whose surname Adeylo had given him at lunch when he heard it. A cry from inside the farmhouse, then a crash. Emeka dropped the phone and ran. He hit the kitchen door at a sprint, and found Adeylo on the floor beside an overturned stool she had climbed, 8 months pregnant, to reach the high shelf where she kept her grandmother's good enamel teapot, because she would be damned if she would be made to feel like an invalid in her own house. One hand braced against the cupboard, her face gone gray, the other hand pressed hard and low against the underside of her belly. "Emeka, it's too early," she gasped. "It's only 33 weeks, it's not supposed to." And then, her face crumpled in a way that had nothing to do with the fall, and everything to do with the tightening she could feel rolling through her, low and deep and unmistakable, and a thin thread of fear entered her voice that he had never once heard there in all the years he had known her. "The baby," she whispered. "Emeka, something is wrong." The hospital, there was no time for the helicopter. Emeka got her into the rented pickup, because it was the nearest vehicle with a seat that reclined, and he drove the winding 30 kilometers down to the medical center in Jos, faster than the plateau roads had any right to allow. One hand on the wheel and one hand crushed around hers, and Adeylo breathed through the tightenings the way the books had told her to, and tried between them not to let him see how frightened she was. "Talk to me," she said at one point, mostly to keep herself from spiraling down. "Say something, anything. Just don't be quiet." So Emeka talked. He told her about Lagos, about the years she had missed, about the way he had thrown himself into the work, because the work was the only thing that never asked him why his wife had left. He told her he had kept her photograph in a drawer he never opened, and had opened it anyway some nights, more nights than he would ever admit. He talked the whole 30 kilometers, his voice steady even when his hands were not, and somewhere in the middle of it, Adeylo realized she was holding on to his words the way she was holding on to his hand, because they were the only two solid things in a world that had very suddenly started to come apart. They took her straight back, through a flurry of scrubs and questions, a monitor strapped across her belly, and left Emeka standing in a corridor that smelled of antiseptic, useless in a way that all his money had never once made him feel. He called no one. There was no one to call. That fact landed on him hard, there under the humming lights. That the most important person in his life was behind a door he was not permitted through. And the entire vast machinery of his wealth, and his name, could do exactly nothing about it. A nurse came out at last, young, kind-faced, a clipboard in her hands. "Are you the father?" Emeka opened his mouth. The honest answer was complicated. It was 8 years, and a forged voice and a hotel bar in Lagos, and a question Adeylo had never quite answered in the tomato field. "Is it mine?" he had asked. She had told him December and let him do the arithmetic, but she had never once said the word. "He started. "He is with me." Adeylo's voice, weak but clear from beyond the door. "Let him in." The nurse held the door. Emeka went through. Adeylo lay propped on the bed, the monitor beeping its steady rhythm beside her, and the gray had gone from her face, replaced by an exhausted relief. A doctor, older, calm, the kind of calm that comes from 40 years of catching babies, was studying the printout. "False alarm, more or less," the doctor said. "What you felt were contractions, but they have already settled. The fall gave us a fright and gave you one, which is half of what brought them on. The baby's heartbeat is strong, steady. This one is fine." He looked at Adeylo over his glasses. "But your blood pressure is too high, and you have been doing far too much, and I am going to be very direct with you, because I do not think anyone else has been. If you keep climbing stools and stringing fence at 33 weeks, the next set of contractions may not settle. Do you understand me?" "I understand," Adeylo said quietly. "You need rest, real rest, and you need people around you who will make certain you get it." The doctor's eyes moved briefly to Emeka. Then he flipped a page on the clipboard, already moving on to the next bit of administrative business, with the half-attention of a man who had said this same sentence 10,000 times. "Good, good. Due date confirmed for the 3rd week of December, based on the dating scan, which puts conception right around the end of the dry season, and we will just confirm for the file. Father listed here as Emeka Adeylo. That is correct? You will want to update the emergency contacts before you." The room went very quiet. Emeka turned to look at Adeylo. She had gone still against the pillows, and he understood, all at once, what the doctor had just said without meaning to say anything at all. That somewhere in the intake paperwork, in a moment of crisis with a clipboard pushed at her and a pen in her hand, Adeylo Okereke had written his name in the blank that asked for the father's. Not Bellows, not unknown, not a line left empty his. "You are listed as the father," the doctor said to Emeka now, mild and oblivious, tapping the line. "Sir, you're the father. Did you want to be added to the contact list, or—" "Yes," Emeka said. His voice cracked clean down the middle on the single syllable. "Yes, add me to everything." The doctor, sensing at last that he had wandered into the middle of something he did not understand, nodded and excused himself and stepped out, and the door swung shut, and Emeka and Adeylo were alone with the steady beep of their child's heartbeat filling the silence between them. "You wrote my name," he said. Adeylo looked at the ceiling. 2 tears slid down toward her ears. "It is the truth," she said. "Whatever else is true, that one is true. I did not plan to tell you. I planned to raise this child alone and let you go back to your towers and never know. But they handed me the form, and they asked me who the father was, and I—" Her voice broke. "I could not write a lie. Not on that. Not on the one piece of paper that is about her." "Her?" Emeka crossed the room. He took Adeylo's hand. Really took it this time. Both of his wrapped around it, the way he had not let himself in the truck. "It's a girl, it's a girl." A wet, helpless laugh escaped her. "I was not going to tell you that either." He brought a hand to his mouth and held it there, his eyes shut, and when he could speak again, his voice was a ruin. "I missed the first one, the one in the lodge. I wasn't there, and I will carry that the rest of my life. But I am here for this one, Adeylo. I am here right now, and I am not going anywhere. Not back to Lagos, not to any tower. Nowhere that is not wherever you and this little girl are. Do you hear me? My mother stole 8 years from us with a lie. I am not giving her one more day." Adeylo looked at him for a long, long moment, at the man weeping over her hand in a hospital room, at the father of the daughter coming in December, at the husband she had grieved as a coward who had, it turned out, never betrayed her at all, and some wall that had stood inside her for 8 years, load-bearing, exhausting, built on a forged voice, finally began to come down. "I hear you," she whispered. But hundreds of kilometers south, the woman who had built that wall in the first place was not finished. Halima Adeylo set down her telephone in the drawing room of her Abuja estate, the oil painting glowing dark above the wall safe behind it, and her expression was that of a woman recalculating. Her son's assistant in Lagos had called, asking for old travel records. For a background check, the girl had said. "Mr. Adeylo wishes to verify someone in Jos." Halima had not survived 2 husbands and 40 years of careful maneuvering, without knowing what it meant, when a son who never asked about the past suddenly began pulling at threads. He had found her. Halima knew it the way she knew the coming rains. He had found the girl, and the girl had told him about the folder. And now Emeka was up on that plateau turning over stones. She rose, smoothed her skirt, and walked to the window overlooking the long drive. "Have the car brought around for the morning," she told the steward. "I am going up to Jos. There is a family matter that needs attending to before it gets out of hand," and she smiled the way a knife smiles. The denial they came home from the hospital under orders. Bed rest, modified, not total, but real. No fences, no stools, no 30-kilometer drives unless someone else held the wheel. And Adeylo, who had spent 8 years being the only person she could rely on, found herself in the strange and unbearable position of being told to lean on someone and not knowing how. Emeka made it easy, and he made it hard. Easy, because he was suddenly everywhere, moving her grandmother's good teapot down to a low shelf, so she would never have to climb again, carrying in firewood, learning from a battered notebook on the kitchen counter exactly when the cow took her feed, and how the well pump had to be coaxed in the cold plateau mornings. He had canceled Lagos, actually canceled it. She had heard him on the phone with his board, his voice flat and final. "I am in Jos indefinitely. Run it without me, or don't. I do not care which." This from a man whose entire self she had once believed was the company. Hard. Because every kind thing he did was a brick pulled out of the wall she had spent 8 years building, and she did not trust the ground underneath. "You will leave," she told him on the second night. When he brought her tea, she had not asked for and sat at the foot of the bed like he belonged there. Not now. Now it is all guilt and adrenaline and a heartbeat on a monitor. But the baby will come, and the season will turn, and one morning you will wake up in a draughty farmhouse 3 hours from anything, and remember you own half of Lagos, and you will go, and I will have let her get used to you. That is the part I cannot allow, Emeka. I can survive you leaving. She should not have to learn how." Emeka set the tea down. 8 years ago I came home to an empty penthouse, and I did not leave Lagos for a decade. Because I thought if I stayed in one place you might come back to it. That is not a man who leaves Adeylo. That is a man who waited in the wrong house for 10 years. Because he did not know any better. That was before you knew the truth. The truth is easy to be noble about when it is fresh. "Then test me," he said it simply. "Don't trust me yet. I have not earned it. Just let me stay long enough to earn it. And if I don't, if I ever once do the thing you are so sure I will do, then you will have been right, and you can tell our daughter. Her mother was right about everything, and I will deserve every word of it." He stood. "But I think you are going to be wrong. I think it is going to frighten you how wrong you are going to be." She did not answer. But she did not tell him to go either, and they both knew that meant something. The wrongness, when it came, did not come from Emeka. It came up the gravel drive the next morning, in a black car with Abuja plates, and Adeylo saw it from the bedroom window, and felt 8 years collapse to nothing in the space of a single breath. "Emeka." Her voice came out strange. "Your mother is here." She watched him go very still in the kitchen doorway. Watched the kind, exhausted, hopeful man of the last few days harden into something she had never seen in him. Something cold and load-bearing and very, very angry. "Stay upstairs," he said. "This is my house. I know it is, and I am asking you, please, to let me meet her first. 3 days ago you did not know whether I had made that voice note. You deserve to watch me prove whose side I am on." He was already moving toward the door. "Stay at the top of the stairs if you want. Hear all of it. But let me stand between you and her, just this once. Let me be the thing that stands in front of you." So she stood at the top of the stairs, one hand on the banister and one on her belly, and she listened. Halima Adeylo came through the farmhouse door without knocking, the way she had come through the penthouse door 8 years before. And she surveyed the worn furniture and the wood stove and the second mortgage notices on the counter, with a single sweeping glance that priced everything and valued none of it. "Darling," she said to Emeka, lifting a powdered cheek. "What a journey. Could you not have chosen somewhere with a tarred road?" Emeka did not kiss her cheek. "Why are you here, mother?" "Because my son has gone dark, and started running background checks, and canceled an indefinite amount of business to play farmhand in the hills, and a mother worries." She set her handbag on the kitchen table. I am here to bring you back to your life before you embarrass yourself. This, a flick of the wrist at the whole farm, the whole valley, the woman she knew was listening upstairs, is a fantasy. A guilt fantasy. You always did have a savior streak. It is not love, Emeka, it is penance. And penance burns out. I know about the voice note, Emeka said. The room changed, to her enormous credit, or her enormous guilt. Halima did not pretend not to understand. She simply went still, the way a cat goes still, recalculating. I know you had it made. He went on, his voice terribly even. I know you let yourself into my home while I was in Johannesburg, and you sat my pregnant wife down with a fake settlement and a fake recording of my own voice, and you drove her out of my life. I know she lost the baby 3 weeks later, alone in a lodge on the Jos Road, because of you. And I know that for 8 years you let me believe she left because she was weak, when the truth is she left because she loved me too much. To fight a man she had been told did not want her. He took a step closer. Did I leave anything out? For a long moment Halima said nothing. Then terribly she smiled. I did it because I was right, she said. Look at this place, Emeka. Look at what she is, a farm girl with red dirt under her nails and a mortgage she cannot pay. I gave you 8 years to build something real, instead of throwing yourself away on a girl who photographed vegetables for a brochure. And you built an empire, and you are welcome. She lifted her chin. And now there is a child, I assume. That is what this is. Well, children can be provided for from a distance. I will have the lawyers draw up something generous. She need never climb a stool again. She reached into her handbag and drew out a checkbook. The same gesture. The same checkbook 8 years later. She uncapped a gold pen and looked up the stairs, directly at Adeylo, who had come down 3 steps without realizing it. There you are, Halima said pleasantly. Let us not pretend you were not listening. You took nothing last time. Very principled, very dramatic. I respected it in a way. But you are older now and more tired, and you have a baby coming and a farm drowning in debt. The pen hovered. So let us both be adults, name a figure, make it large, and give my son back his life. The farmhouse was dead silent except for the tick of the wood stove. And Daisy Okereke, 8 months pregnant, one hand on her grandmother's banister, looked at the checkbook, and then at Emeka, standing between her and his mother exactly as he had promised. And she opened her mouth to answer. The villain resurfaces. Put the checkbook away, Halima. Adeylo came down the last 3 stairs slowly, her hand never leaving the banister, and she crossed the kitchen to stand beside Emeka, not behind him, beside him, and she looked the older woman dead in the eye. You could not buy me at 26 when I had nothing, she said. You are certainly not buying me now that I know exactly what you are. You stole 8 years and a baby from 2 people who loved each other. There is no figure for that. There is no check that covers it. And you will not write your granddaughter's name in the same breath as an amount of money. Not in my grandmother's house. Halima's pleasant mask slipped at the edges. You sentimental little. Get out, Emeka said. Emeka, get out of her house, mother. Get in your car. And understand that the next conversation we have will be through lawyers. Because I am going to spend whatever it takes to find the man you paid to build that recording. And when I find him, this stops being a family matter. This becomes forgery and fraud and a crime. He opened the door. The cold plateau air poured in. You taught me how to win. I will give you that. You are about to find out how well I learned. For one suspended moment, Halima Adeylo looked at her son as though seeing a stranger. Then she capped the gold pen, returned the checkbook to her handbag with a steadiness that was almost admirable, and walked out into the gray morning without another word. The black car crunched away down the gravel and was gone. Adeylo let out a breath she felt as though she had been holding for 8 years. You stood in front of me, she said quietly. I told you I would. She turned to him, and something in her face had at last fully changed. The weariness gone, or going, replaced by something raw and frightened and real. I believe you, she said. God help me, after everything I believe you. He reached for her, careful, and she let him. And for the first time in 8 years, Emeka Adeylo held his wife, ex-wife. The word meant nothing now. In a warm farmhouse kitchen while their daughter turned between them and the wood stove ticked, and outside the first cold winds of the harmattan came sweeping down off the hills. It should have been the end of the storm. It was only the eye of it. The plant. The thing about Bello was that he had been watching the black car too. He had watched it come up the drive from the back fence and watched it leave. And something about the timing of it. The rich mother arriving the same week. The rich husband started running background checks. Had spooked him badly enough that he made a phone call he should not have made. From a place he thought was safe. He was wrong about the place. Emeka had spent his days quietly learning the farm, and one of the things he had learned was that the old baby monitor Adays kept clipped to her belt for when she was down in the barn picked up, on its second channel, every word spoken near the equipment shed, where the charging cradle sat. He had not meant to use it. He had been reaching for his tea on the shed workbench, hunting the source of a rattle in the well pump, when the monitor crackled to life with Bello's voice 15 feet away on the far side of the wall. Don't care what the timeline was, the survey is the only thing that matters. No, listen to me. The geologists confirmed it. There's tin and columbite running right under the lower field, same seam that made men rich 2 ridges over. My people at Zenith Corps still want the parcel. The only thing standing in the way is her clean title. Yes, the grandmother's will. There's a gap in it. The transfer to Ada was never properly recorded with the lands registry. I've seen the deed box. It's all in the house. If Zenith Corps files a claim before she fixes it, she's tied up in court for 2 years, and she sells for scraps just to make it stop. My cut is 15% of the flip, same as we agreed. I'll get the deed box. She trusts me. She's about to have a baby. She's not watching the paperwork. Emeka stood frozen behind the shed wall, tea cooling in his hand, and felt something very old and very cold come back to life in his chest. The part of him that had built an empire by always knowing exactly where the knife was coming from. Bello was not a farmhand who had drifted in on good references. He was a plant, placed 14 months ago before Lagos, before the baby, before any of it, by a mining company that wanted what was under the land and had worked out that the fastest way to it ran through a flaw in a dying woman's will and a trusted man inside the house, and the references Adays had never checked were forged. The irony of it nearly took Emeka's legs out from under him. A forged voice had destroyed this family once. A set of forged letters had been quietly working to finish the job for 14 months. He did not confront Bello. Not yet. You do not tip your hand the moment you see the cards. Halima had taught him that, the one useful thing. Instead, he drove into Joe's that afternoon while Adays slept, and sat down with the best property lawyer in the state, and a retainer large enough to make her cancel her other appointments, and within 3 hours, he had the truth in writing. The grandmother's transfer of the farm to Adays had indeed never been properly recorded. An honest clerical gap from a death during a hard season 8 years ago. The title was vulnerable. A determined company with a hungry lawyer could file a competing claim and freeze everything for years. But a gap could be closed. A transfer could be properly recorded, quietly, immediately, before any claim was filed. It was a race, and Emeka Adeylo had spent his whole life winning races. Other people did not know they were running. The lawyer drew up the documents. They needed Adays' signature, the original deed from the house, and a filing at the lands registry, which closed at 4 and did not reopen until after the long public holiday weekend. It was a Thursday, the day before the holiday, and when Emeka got back to the farm at dusk, the Harmattan wind screaming now, and carrying a wall of red dust across the hills, he found Bello's truck gone from its usual nose-out spot, and the kitchen door standing open, and Adays on her knees on the floor of the front room beside the open, empty deed box, her face gray as ash. "It's gone," she said. "The deed, the will, all of it. Bello said he would take the documents to the bank's safe deposit box for me weeks ago after the break-in scare, and I let him. Emeka, I trusted him, and now he is not answering his phone. And the box is—" She stopped. Her hand went to her belly. Her face changed. "Emeka, that is not—" Her breath caught. A long, low tightening rolled visibly through her, and this one did not settle. Outside, the wind thickened, the road already vanishing behind curtains of dust the nearest help hours away. "Emeka, it's not stopping this time, it's not." She gripped his arm hard enough to bruise. "I think it's coming. I think she's coming now." The reckoning, the first thing Emeka did, was the hardest thing for a man like him. He stopped thinking about the land. The deed was gone. Bello was gone. Zenith Core was out there somewhere in the coming dark, holding the only documents that protected, the only home Ades had ever felt safe in. And Emeka looked at his wife on her knees on the front room floor, gripping her belly, and he let all of it go. The land could be fought for later. The land was only land. Okay, he said, kneeling, taking her face in both hands. Okay, look at me. The baby comes first. Everything else can burn. Do you understand me? Everything else can burn. We are getting you to Jos. But Jos was 30 kilometers away, and the plateau road outside had disappeared into a churning red night. And when Emeka got the truck started and pulled to the end of the gravel drive, the headlights showed him the truth. A wall of dust. The road unfindable. Drifts of red earth already crawling across the tarmac where it should have been. He made it 2 kilometers before the wheels lost the road entirely, and the truck slewed sideways into the ditch and stopped. He sat 1 second with his hands on the wheel, and his heart slamming. Then he called the emergency line, and a dispatcher with a tired, steady voice told him what he already knew. That the ambulances could not run the plateau roads in a harmattan storm this thick, that the nearest one was on another call across the valley, that it would be hours. Get her warm. Get her safe. We will talk you through it if it comes to that. Women have had babies on these hills for a very long time before there were hospitals. Sir, you are going to be all right. He carried Ades back inside through the screaming dust. He built the fire up high. He found every clean cloth and sheet in the house, and tucked into the back of her grandmother's battered notebook on the kitchen counter. God bless that woman, dead 8 years, and still looking after her own. 3 pages in faded ink, titled If the Baby Comes and the Road is Closed, because the Okereke farm had been 3 hours from a hospital in a hard season for 100 years, and this had happened before. Your grandmother left us a map, Emeka said, showing her, and Ades laughed through a contraction, wet and disbelieving. Of course she did. She never trusted a road in her life. The dispatcher stayed on the line, phone propped on the side table, her calm voice threading through the long hours. The storm threw itself against the windows. The contractions came closer, and in the spaces between them, because there were spaces, long ones, and a laboring woman and a frightened man have to fill the time with something. They talked, really talked, the way they had not in 8 years. I have to tell you something about the deed, he said during one of the quiet stretches, mopping her forehead. And you are going to be angry, and that is fair. She told him she already knew. Not the details, but enough. She had seen the empty box. She had done her own arithmetic on Bello. 14 months, she said bitterly. He held the cow's head when the vet came. He fixed my well pump. He sat at my table and ate my food, and the whole time he was a forged reference and a hungry company's man inside your house. Emeka finished. I know, I am going to fix it, Ades. I swear to you on this baby's life. I am going to fix it, but not tonight. Tonight, there is only one thing in the world I care about, and she is about to arrive. Ades looked at him in the firelight, sweat-soaked and exhausted, and 8 years passed believing in him. Say it again. There is only one thing in the world I care about. No. Another contraction was gathering. He could see it building in her face. The other part. The part about the land not mattering. Say it again, so I can believe a rich man actually said it. So, he said it again, holding both her hands, the fire roaring and the storm shrieking, and the dispatcher waiting on the line. It is only land. You are not. Our daughter is not. Zenith Core can have every acre, and I will buy you a new farm and a new hill and a whole new valley to put it in. There is nothing on this earth I will not trade for the 2 of you. Everything else can burn. And Ades Okereke, who had grieved this man as a coward, who had built 8 years of armor on a forged voice, who had sworn on her grandmother's grave never to let him near a child of hers, looked at the father of her daughter through the haze of a contraction, and finally, fully without reservation, let herself love him again. Okay, she gasped, as the wave crested and her body bore down with a force that brooked no argument. Okay, Emeka, it's time. It's really time. I've got you, he said, moving to where her grandmother's 3 pages told him to be, his hands steady now in a way they had never once been in any boardroom. I've got you. I am not in Johannesburg. I am not 14 hours away. I am right here. Push when your body tells you. I've got her. I've got you both." The storm raged, the fire burned, the dispatcher counted, and hundreds of kilometers to the south, oblivious, Halima Adeylo's car sat stranded at a closed checkpoint on a dust-blind highway. The woman who had stolen the first baby, unable to reach the birth of the second, while in a fire-lit farmhouse her son knelt on his grandmother-in-law's floor and prepared, with his own two hands, to catch his daughter. "I can see." Emeka's voice broke entirely. Adiz, I can see her head. The birth she came into the world by firelight in the front room of a farmhouse 100 years old, while a harmattan storm sealed the valley shut, and a dispatcher named Ngozi counted breaths through a phone propped on a side table. Emeka Adeylo caught his daughter in his own two hands. He would never for the rest of his life be able to describe the next 30 seconds in a way that did them any justice. There was the slick, impossible weight of her. There was the held breath of the whole house. There was the dispatcher's voice saying, "Rub her back. Get her crying. You want to hear her cry." And then there was the cry itself, thin and furious and astonishing, filling the firelit room, the single most important sound he had ever heard. "She's crying," he said, or sobbed, or both. "Adiz, she's here. She's crying. Give her to me." Adiz was reaching, weeping, laughing. "Give her to me." He laid the baby on her mother's chest, and Adiz folded around her daughter. And for one moment the storm and the stolen deed and the 8 stolen years all ceased to exist. There was only the fire and the three of them, and a girl who had arrived a few weeks early into the worst weather in a decade, and announced herself anyway, loud and alive. "Hello," Adiz whispered into the dark, wet curls. "Hello, there you are. We have been waiting for you." Emeka pressed his lips to his wife's soaked hair, and his hand to his daughter's tiny back, feeling it rise and fall, and the man who had owned towers and freight and a name that opened doors understood, finally and completely, that he had never owned a single thing that mattered until this exact moment, on this floor, in this storm. "Ngozi," he said hoarsely to the dispatcher, and it was only later he would realize he had spoken the dispatcher's name, and it would become his daughter's blessing, the plateau word for it. "She's here. She's breathing, they're both." He looked at Adiz, and the words died in his throat, because Adiz had gone pale. Not the exhausted pale of a woman who had just given birth on a farmhouse floor. Something else. Something wrong. The color was draining out of her face the way water drains from a tipped glass, fast and complete. And her arms around the baby had gone loose. "Emeka," she said, and her voice was very far away. "I feel strange. I feel the room is going." "Ngozi." Emeka's voice cut like a blade. "Something's wrong. She's gray. There's blood. There's too much blood. She's bleeding and she's not." The dispatcher's calm cracked into a new register. Fast, precise. The voice of someone who had just heard the exact words she had been praying not to hear. "Listen to me. Listen very carefully. She may be hemorrhaging. I need you to do exactly what I say right now, no questions." Emeka took the baby from Adiz's loosening arms. "No," his wife murmured. "No, give her back. I want." And he set the crying newborn safe in a nest of cloths by the fire, and turned back to do what the dispatcher told him. The firm massage low on the belly, the legs raised, the pressure, the desperate mechanical work of trying to keep a woman's blood inside her body with his bare hands, while a storm locked every doctor 30 kilometers away. "Stay with me," he said. He was weeping and did not know it. "Adiz, stay with me. We just got her. We just got you back. You do not get to, after 8 years, you do not get to leave me in a room again. Do you hear me? Not again. Not again." Her eyes drifted toward him. There was a small, terrible smile on her gray lips. "You came back," she whispered. "I knew you didn't make it. I knew it wasn't you. Don't talk like that. Don't you dare talk like that is a goodbye. Name her Ngozi," Adiz said, the words slurring now, her eyes sliding closed. "It means blessing. Tell her about the garden in Surulere, where you found me, the little brochure. Tell her I was happy that day. Tell her I was happy at the end. You tell her." He gripped her face. "You tell her yourself, Adiz. Open your eyes. Open your eyes." And outside, through the howl of the storm, came a sound Emeka had stopped letting himself hope for. The deep diesel growl of a road grader breaking through the drifts of red earth on the plateau road. And behind it, lights strobing against the flying dust. A rugged off-road ambulance that had spent 2 hours fighting its way up a road that did not exist. Following the grader meter by meter, toward the only lit window in a dark and howling valley, headlights swept the front room wall. A fist hammered the door. "In here!" Emeka roared. His hands still pressed to his wife, the baby screaming by the fire, the dispatcher's voice still threading from the phone. "She's bleeding. She's unconscious. In here. Hurry, please. God, hurry!" The door burst open in a blast of wind and dust, and two paramedics in storm gear. And the last thing Emeka saw before they moved him aside and took over was Adeylo's face, slack and gray in the firelight, and his daughter's tiny fist beating the air, and 8 years of stolen time hanging in the balance of the next 60 seconds. The fight to stay, they did not lose her. It was close. Closer than anyone in that firelit room would ever say aloud afterward. The paramedics got the bleeding controlled with the storm, still screaming against the windows, ran a line, packed her, radioed ahead. And then the long white knuckle crawled back down the graded road to Joe's, the grader leading the way like a stubborn diesel angel. Emeka in the back with baby Ngazi zipped inside his coat against his chest, and his wife's cold hand in his other fist, saying her name over and over like a man who had decided that if he just kept saying it, she could not leave. "A postpartum hemorrhage," the doctor said later. "Severe. Another 30 minutes without the ambulance, and they would have been telling him a different sentence. But the grader had come, and the ambulance had come, and the grandmother's 3 faded pages had bought exactly enough time. And Adey's Okereke opened her eyes 2 days later, in a Joe's hospital room, to find Emeka asleep in a chair with their daughter on his chest, both of them breathing, the early Harmattan light coming gold and clean through the window. "You're still here," she said. He woke instantly. "I'm still here. I thought I dreamed the part where you caught her. You didn't dream it." He stood carefully, the baby a small warm weight against him, and brought Gozi to her mother's arms. "You didn't dream any of it. 3 days ago a helicopter landed in your tomato field and ruined a very expensive pair of shoes, and everything since then is true." And Adey's gathered her daughter close and wept, and this time it was the good kind, the kind that washes something clean. Justice the land was the part that was not clean yet. Zenith Core Minerals filed their claim the Monday after the holiday, exactly as Bello's phone call had promised. A competing interest in the Okereke parcel, citing the unrecorded transfer, seeking to freeze the property in litigation until a rightful chain of title could be established. It was, Emeka's lawyer admitted, with grudging professional respect, a clean and vicious piece of work. With the original deed and will stolen, Adey's had almost nothing to fight it with. Almost, because Emeka Adeylo had spent 40 years learning how to win, and the man who had canceled an empire to kneel on a farmhouse floor was not about to lose his wife's grandmother's land to a mining company over a clerical gap from a hard season 8 years gone. He hired 3 lawyers. He flew in a forensic title examiner. He had the state registry's oldest colonial-era survey maps and microfilm pulled and read by hand, and he made one phone call he had been saving. To the private investigator, who had been quietly building the file on the man his mother had paid to build that voice note. "While you are in the business of finding people who do not want to be found," Emeka told him, "find me Bello." They found him in 9 days. Bello Siraj, that was the full name. The forged references had been half true, the way the best lies always are. He was holed up in a roadside motel outside Kaduna, waiting for his 15% from a Zenith Core executive who, it turned out, had no intention whatsoever of paying a man who could implicate him. Bello had worked that out at about the same moment the investigator knocked on his door, and Bello, who was a thief and a liar, but not, it turned out, a man with much stomach left for it, did the arithmetic on which side was going to win, and made the only smart play left to him. He still had the deed box. He had never handed it to Zenith Core. That had been his one card, his insurance, the thing he had held back, precisely because he did not trust the people paying him. The original deed, the grandmother's will, the whole chain of title Adey's needed. It was in a duffel bag under a motel bed outside Kaduna, and Bello Siraj traded it, along with a signed statement detailing exactly who at Zenith Core had hired him, and how, in exchange for Emeka's lawyers not burying him under the fraud charges he had more than earned. "Why did you keep it?" Emeka asked him, the one time, in a lawyer's office with a recorder running. You could have handed it over months ago and been paid. Bello looked at his own hands for a long moment. She sat with my mother, he said finally. Didn't know that, did you? My ma took sick last year. Ada drove her to the clinic in Joss 3 times when I couldn't get off the farm, sat with her, brought her pepper soup. He shook his head. I am not a good man, Mr. Adeylo. I did what I came to do mostly, but I was not going to be the reason that woman lost her house. Could not make myself take the last step. I suppose that is the only decent thing I have got to show for the whole rotten business. It was not redemption exactly, but it was the deed box. And with the original documents recovered, and Bello's signed statement naming names, Zenith Corps' clean, vicious claim came apart in a week. The transfer was properly recorded at last, 8 years late, in Adie's name, free and clear. The land was hers. It had always been hers. Now the state had it in ink. And Halima Adeylo's forger, it turned out, had kept records too. People in that business always do. The same careful instinct that kept an encrypted drive in a safe behind an oil painting. Faced with Emeka's investigator and Emeka's lawyers and the very real crime of forging a recording used to dissolve a marriage, the man in Ikeja gave a full statement, and Emeka sat his mother down in her own drawing room beneath the dark glowing painting and laid the whole file on the table between them. I am not going to send you to prison, he told her. For Gozi's sake, not yours. She is going to grow up knowing she has a grandmother, even one who has to earn every single minute of it, from a distance, supervised, on my terms. That is more than you deserve, and it is the most you will ever get. He stood. But you will never be alone in a room with my wife or my daughter again. You will never write a check toward either of them again. And the next time you reach for a folder, Mother, you will remember that I have one too. We understand each other. For the first time in her life, Halima Adeylo had nothing to say. Emeka left her there under the painting and drove north, through the gold and blowing dust, toward the only place he wanted to be. Everything changed. They were married in the harmattan cool of a December morning, in the lower field where the tomato rows had been the day the helicopter came down. It was Adey's who chose the spot. Right here, she had said, walking him out to it, Gozi on her hip. Because I want to stand exactly where I was, standing when I looked up and saw you, and thought my whole quiet life was about to be ruined. She had laughed. Turns out it was best ruin that ever happened to me. So they put up a simple white canopy between the barn and the fence line, and the neighbors came. The real ones, the plateau people who had quietly kept Adey's alive through 8 hard years with Yam, and borrowed tools and lifts into Jos. Somebody's uncle played a talking drum, and the terraced green hills rolled on forever into the warm morning, and there was not 1 acre of it that was not hers. Emeka wore no jacket. He had learned over the season to leave the jacket off. He had learned a great many things on that farm. How to coax the well pump, how to muck a stall, how to read the coming weather in the way the cattle stood, how to be a man in a place where his name opened no doors at all, and a strong back and a kept promise were the only currency that spent. He had kept the company. You do not throw away an empire, and besides, empires pay for forensic title examiners and good lawyers and a school fund for a girl named Gozi. But he ran it now from a converted room in the barn, with a satellite dish and terrible coffee, 2 days a week, and the rest of his life happened with red dust on his boots. His board thought he had lost his mind. Emeka thought he had finally found it. When the moment came for his vows, he held his daughter on one arm, her fist in his collar, and had to speak them one-handed, and his voice broke twice, and nobody minded. 8 years ago I came home to an empty room, he said, and I spent all of them since believing a lie about why. I am not going to talk about that lie today, because it does not get any more of our time. It took enough. He looked at Adey's in her simple dress in the field where he had first seen her again. Here is the truth instead. I own things towers freight a name. And I would trade every last piece of it today right now, for one more morning in this field with the 2 of you. That is not a vow, that is just arithmetic. The same arithmetic I did standing in your tomatoes. Except this time it comes out right. He swallowed. I almost lost you in a storm with our daughter in my coat. I am not going to waste a single day of whatever I have been given since. I promise you the boots, and the bad coffee, and the broken fences. I promise you, I will be in the room every time. For the rest of it, I will be in the room." Adeylo was crying and laughing, and so was half the plateau. "You ruined my quiet life," she told him when it was her turn. "I did. Don't you ever unruin it." "I won't." Bella was not there, of course. But that season a battered envelope came, postmarked from somewhere far to the east, no return address. Inside was a money order, small, all the man could manage, made out toward the farm, and a single line on a torn scrap of paper. "For the clinic runs. We are square now. Tell the child somebody she will never meet was rooting for her." B.S. Adeylo read it twice, then tucked it into her grandmother's notebook, near the 3 fate pages about babies and closed roads, where the family kept the things that had saved them. Halima came once, the following year, supervised, stiff, visibly uncertain what to do with a baby who shrieked with joy and yanked at her gold earrings. She did not write a check. She held her granddaughter for 11 careful minutes under Emeka's watchful eye. And when she handed Ngozi back, there was something in the old woman's face that nobody could quite name. And nobody chose to. It was not forgiveness. The family did not trade in that yet, and perhaps never fully would. But it was the smallest possible beginning of something. The valley turned through its seasons. The tomatoes came in heavy that first year, and Emeka learned to can them badly, and then less badly. The cow calved in the spring. The back fence got fixed properly. The second mortgage was paid off in a single afternoon and a single signature, and Adeylo cried about that too, standing in the kitchen with the cleared notice in her hand. Because there are some kinds of safety you stop believing you are allowed to have. 5 years later, the school bus stopped at the end of the gravel drive at 20 to 4 every weekday, and every weekday a small dark-curled tornado named Ngozi Adeylo came tearing down the lane toward the farmhouse, satchel bouncing, announcing her arrival at the same volume. She had announced everything since the night she was born in a storm. "Daddy, Daddy, I drew the farm." Emeka came down off the veranda to catch her the way he caught her every afternoon and swung her up. She was 5 now and getting heavy, and he refused to notice, and admired the crayon drawing she shoved into his face, a lopsided red barn, 4 legs that were apparently a cow, 2 big stick figures and 1 small one, and a great yellow scribble overhead that she informed him was the sun. "Because it's never harmattan in my pictures. I don't like the storm part of the story." "No," Emeka agreed, carrying her up the steps. "Neither do I, my dear. The storm part is the scary part." She knew the story. Not all of it, not the forged voice, not the stolen years, not the duffel bag under a motel bed or the checkbook in an Abuja drawing room. Those were for later, for a version of her old enough to hold their weight. But she knew the shape that mattered, that a man had come up the lane one day out of a flying machine, and her mama had been waiting, and she herself had arrived in a storm into her daddy's own 2 hands, while a kind voice on the telephone counted. She made them tell it constantly. It was, as far as Ngozi was concerned, the only story worth telling, and she narrated her own version to the goats, the chickens, and any visitor who held still long enough. The farm had changed in 5 years, and had not. It was solvent now, more than solvent. The tomatoes had become a small, fierce local brand, with a stall at the Joe's Market, and a handshake deal with 2 hotel kitchens, and a website a days ran badly and lovingly from the kitchen table. Emeka's company had thrived precisely because he had stopped strangling it. They had money. They would always have money. But the money lived quietly here now, in fixed fences and a new barn roof and a school fund and the plain, unremarkable safety of a woman who no longer flinched at the post. Adeylo came out onto the veranda, wiping her hands, a second pregnancy just beginning to show beneath her wrapper. This one, she had told Emeka when the test came back. "We do with a hospital and a tarred road and absolutely no helicopters. Thank you very much." And she watched her husband and her daughter argue cheerfully about whether the crayon cow needed a tail, and she let herself feel the thing she still did not entirely trust after all this time, that it had held, that he had stayed, that every single morning for 5 years she had woken and he had been in the room, exactly as he had promised, on a farmhouse floor with a storm screaming outside. "You are staring," Emeka said, without looking up. "I am allowed. I married you." "You did." He set Ngozi down to chase a chicken, and crossed to his wife, and put his hand on the new small curve of her. the way he had not been allowed to the first time, the way he would never once take for granted. Best ruin that ever happened to you. Don't get smug. I am still deciding. You have been deciding for 5 years. It's a big decision. He laughed and kissed her there on the veranda in the late gold light, with the hills rolling green and endless behind them, and their daughter shrieking joyfully at a chicken that wanted nothing to do with her. Halima died that autumn. There was no dramatic deathbed reconciliation, because life is not always a telenovela, and some wounds simply scar over without ever quite healing. She had had her supervised hours over the years, a careful handful of them twice yearly, always on Emeka's terms. Ngozi knew her as a stiff, formal old woman who smelled of expensive powder, and never quite knew what to do with a loud child. But near the end she had asked to see Adeylo alone, and Adeylo, who knew better than anyone alive. What the woman had cost her had gone. What was said between them stayed between them. Adeylo never told even Emeka the whole of it. But she came home quiet that evening, and she walked out to the lower field where the tomatoes were. And she stood a long while in the exact spot where a helicopter had once come down, and when she came back inside she said only, she knew what she did. At the end she knew, that is enough. I do not need her sorry, I only needed her to know. And in the will, because Halima Adeylo never in her life did a single thing without a document. She left the bulk of her estate not to Emeka, who did not need it, but in trust to Ngozi, and to the new baby coming, and to any further children of my son and his wife. It was the closest thing to an apology the woman was capable of. Not words, never words, but the one language she had always spoken fluently, the transfer of what she valued most into the hands of the family she had tried so hard to destroy. Adeylo read the clause twice, then folded the paper away. We will tell them it came from their grandmother, she decided. Just that, not the rest of it. The rest of it dies with her. They get to have a grandmother who left them something. That is the version they get. And Emeka looked at his wife. The woman who had been driven out into the rain by that old woman's lie, who had grieved a baby alone in a roadside lodge because of her, and who had just chosen, freely, to hand their children a kinder story than the true one. And he thought, not for the first time, that he had married someone far better than he had ever deserved. One warm harvest night, 6 years after the storm, the house was full. Plateau neighbors, the ones who had kept Adeylo alive in the lean years and got invited to everything now. A whole herd of children underfoot, and Emeka held his newest daughter, born in a hospital, on a tarred road. No helicopters exactly as promised. A serious, quiet baby named for Adeylo's grandmother, the way Ngozi had been named for a blessing, counted down a phone line in a storm. And he looked down the long, crowded table at the whole impossible life of it. I spent a lot of years, he said, counting the wrong things. I was very good at it. Best in the business. Ngozi rolled her eyes. She had heard this kind of thing before. Then I came down in a tomato field by accident, and somebody made me start counting the right ones, and it turns out I am even better at that. He looked at Adeylo. I am thankful for the accident. I am thankful for the storm. I am thankful for every single thing that went wrong, because it is the only road that led here, and I would not trade 1 foot of it. Okay, that's too much, Ngozi announced. Mama, your turn, say a short one? Adeylo laughed, and looked at her husband across a table full of everything she had once been certain she would never be allowed to have, and kept it short exactly as ordered. I am thankful, she said, that he came up the lane. Outside, soft and harmless and beautiful, the first cool wind of the season moved down over the only acres in the world that mattered. Every last one of them theirs, recorded in ink, paid in full, and home. A billionaire had returned to his pregnant ex-wife after 8 years. What he found on the red hills of Jos had changed everything. And everything, in the end, had turned out to be exactly the right amount. The end.